Good morning, everyone. We are learning Mishna Harah. We are in Parak Beis, chapter 2. We're going to do today Mishnah Beis, Mishnah 2. I'd like to dedicate this morning's learning in memory of my mother, Mrs. Shalamis Rabinowitz, Shalamis Bas Rabbi Yaakov Eliezer. Afar chutza la'aretz, shabah besfina la'aretz. The dirt from outside of Israel that came to Israel in a boat. What's happening here is you've got this boat, it's filled with dirt, or it has partially filled with it, there's dirt in it, and you're growing things in that dirt on the boat. The dirt comes from outside the land of Israel, but it is in the waters of Eretz Yisrael. Chaya b'maisris v'shviyas. That which grows in this boat has an obligation of maisris. That means Truma and maisris have to be separated from it. Uba shviyas, the laws of Shemitah, the 7th year, where the fruits have certain restrictions about how the things that grow in the 7th year, there are specific guidelines and restrictions as to how to treat them. This will all apply to the produce that grows from the dirt of outside of Eretz Yisrael in a boat that's in the waters of Eretz Yisrael. Okay, so again, you've got this boat, it has dirt in it or filled with dirt from outside of Eretz Yisrael. You're planting things in it, but now this dirt is in a boat that's in the waters of Eretz Yisrael, and there's produce growing from it. That is considered like it's growing in Eretz Yisrael, in the land of Israel, and it has the obligation of Trumas and Maisris, and has the laws of Shemitah apply to it. The point here is, clearly, that although it's not directly on the ground, nonetheless, we say that even it's in the waters of the Eretz Yisrael, it is receiving nutrients from the ground that's at the bottom of the water. Not enough to get its nutrients from the water. It's got to be considered it's getting its nutrients from the ground of the water. That means it's getting nutrients from the land of Eretz Yisrael. And therefore, although the physical dirt was not from Eretz Yisrael, as long as it's taking nutrients from the land of Eretz Yisrael, that's considered growing in Eretz Yisrael, and therefore it has the laws of things that grow in Eretz Yisrael. Now, a very important condition has to be met here is that there has to be, as we say, there has to be a hole in this boat. Now, if there's a hole in the boat, it's going to sink, right? So what's happening here is that there's a hole in this boat. The hole is filled with clods of earth to prevent the water from getting in. But basically, you have this hole that has dirt in it, and that's why it's possible to say that that which is growing in the boat is getting nutrients from the ground below the water. If there was no holes in the boat, then the hole would block any nutrients from coming in. Because there's a hole, and the hole is filled with dirt, so therefore we can say the nutrients will come from the ground below the water, through the water, into the dirt by the hole, and then into the earth that is growing in the boat. That is when the Mishnah says that in this case of the dirt from outside of Eretz Yisrael and the boat in Eretz Yisrael, and things are growing in it, what's growing in it is considered like growing in Eretz Yisrael, and you have to separate Trumas and Maasros from it. The laws of Shemitah apply to it. Amar Rabbi Yehuda, the sage Rabbi Yehuda said, Masai, when do we say this? Yehuda qualifies the first halacha. Bizman shasfina gosheshes. It has to be that the boat is touching the bottom of the ground. That means the boat is in very shallow water, and its bottom scrapes against the riverbed. If it's touching the ground, says Rabbi Yehuda, then we can say that it's taking nutrients from the ground. But if it's not touching the ground, Rabbi Yehuda's opinion is we don't say the nutrients go through the water. The nutrients don't go from the ground, from the riverbed, through the water, into the boat. Rabbi Yehuda says no, it's got to be touching the ground. As long as it's touching, then we can say that it's taking nutrients from the ground. The Tanna Kama, the first opinion that we read, disagrees. And he says that even if it's not touching the ground, the dirt in the boat can still be taking nutrients from the ground that comes through the water, through the hole into the boat. Okay, so that was a little bit of an aside that the Mishnah gets into because in the previous Mishnah we're talking about the produce that went in and out of Eretz Yisrael. So therefore it brought in this halacha about the dirt going in and out of Eretz Yisrael, although it's not relevant to challah in any way. Now we go back to a law that pertains to challah. Isa shani lo yeshiv b'mei peres. You have a dough that was kneaded with fruit juice. Now, fruit juice means, number one, the fruit juice we're talking about is pure fruit juice, no water mixed in. And number two, this fruit juice is to the exclusion of 7 specific liquids that are considered the most significant or most, what's the best word? Right, the most significant type of liquids. And we'll see soon what the relevance of that significance is. But the liquids that are considered significant are dew, water, wine, olive oil, blood, milk, and bee's honey. So if we're talking about anything other, if we're talking about, when we talk about May Paris fruit juice, it means fruit juices other than any of those fruit juices that were mentioned, which is wine, olive oil. We're not talking about those fruit juices. Those are one of the 7 significant liquids, but this is talking about any other liquid. Now, Isa Sheniloshim May Paris, you've got this dough, and you're kneading it with this fruit juice. Says the Mishna Chayeves B'chala, you're liable to, there's an obligation of challah to be separated from this dough that was made with pure fruit juice. And it can be eaten with impure hands. Unclean hands, rather. Be eaten with unclean hands. Now, what's the point here? So the point here is like this. There's another place that we find an argument that when a dough is made with fruit juice, do we look at it as a dough, which means as one entity, or do we look at it as many pieces of flour stuck together? According to some opinions, I believe that's the opinion of Rabbi Akiva, found in Mishna Tful Yom, that being that the fruit juice is not considered significant, when it binds together the flour to make a dough, we don't look at it as one entity. We look at it as many little different pieces. That's Rabbi Akiva holds. The opinion of Elazar ben Yehuda there in Tful Yom is that no, being that at the end of the day it binds it together, that's called a dough. This Mishnah clearly is following that opinion, because we know that the obligation of challah has to be from a dough. It's a separation from a dough. So if our Mishnah says that a dough that was made with fruit juice is considered a dough and obligated in challah, that means our Mishnah is following that opinion. That we say that a dough that was kneaded with pure fruit juice is considered a dough and is obligated in challah. Halachically, in practical halakha, the Shulchan Aruch says that we refrain from doing that. I'm not going to get into the reason why. We refrain from doing that, and if you're going to knead a dough with fruit juice, you should add some water to it, and that'll take care of whatever issues there are. Okay, that last part of the Mishnah said, it can be eaten with unclean hands. Now, we learned previously that before you touch challah, you have to wash your hands. That's because the sages decreed that regular unwashed hands are considered tamei, impure. The hands alone are considered tamei, and were they to touch truma or challah, it would make them tamei, would be able to be eaten. Therefore, we learned that before anybody touches challah or truma, they have to wash their hands. That's how you purify your hands that are impure, because they are, regular hands, unwashed hands. Here, by the dough that was made from fruit juice, that we said is obligated in a challah, that challah can actually be eaten with unclean hands, meaning you don't have to wash your hands. Why is that? Because the whole reason you're washing your hands is to not make it impure. But the halacha is that a food can only become impure if it comes to contact one of the 7 liquids we said before. If any of the 7 liquids mentioned before, a food comes into contact with them, that now makes the food susceptible to tuma, to impurity. And then when the source of impurity touches it, it becomes impure. But it must have come into contact with one of those 7 liquids first. If it doesn't, then it will not become impure. If you knead the dough with pure fruit juice, that's not one of the 7 liquids that makes food susceptible to tumah. That means that this dough never became susceptible to tumah. And if you touch it with impure hands, or any impurity touches it, it's not going to become tamei. Therefore, when we're talking about the challah separated from the dough that was made with pure fruit juice, you have to wash your hands for it, because even if your hands would be impure, there would be your hands that are unwashed, and typically you have to wash your hands before touching challah. Here, there's no need to, because even if you touch the challah, it won't become impure. It's not susceptible to tumah, only because it only came into contact with the fruit juice and not with any of the 7 liquids that we mentioned before. Okay, we are now in the laws of Lashon Harah from the Chavetz Chaim, Klal Ches, chapter 8, Sif Yud Gimel, chapter 13. Now we will go through and explain the law regarding accepting Lashon Harah. That which the Torah has warned us regarding accepting Lashon Harah, the Hainu meaning, means it means not to believe that it's true. No need to go into any kind of discussion as to what kind of person we're talking about who is forbidden to accept the Lashon Harah, or the person that you would be accepting it about. There's typically no difference. But the rule is as follows. No, every Jew is commanded not to accept Lashon Harah, not to believe Lashon Harah on any fellow Jew, unless we're talking about heretics or informers, as we spoke about yesterday, that are no more under the category of amisecha, of your friend, of being with you in Torah mitzvahs, because they have intentionally rejected that, not because, and intentionally rejected it at a level of heresy or of going so as to form a fellow Jew. And therefore they are, so to speak, out of the fold in the sense that we don't have the regular obligations to them. And therefore, if you hear Lashon Harah about such a person, you would be able to accept it as the truth. Have a wonderful day and a wonderful Shabbos.